Today at the National Press Club, Universities Australia CEO Luke Sheehy. As the nation's universities face funding and enrolment challenges, he'll emphasise the need for greater collaboration between the government and the sector. Universities Australia CEO Luke Sheehy with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is Julie Hare. I'm the Education Editor at the Australian Financial Review and a Director here at the club. Today's speaker is Luke Sheehy. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Universities Australia. He took over the role at the beginning of last year when a vacancy suddenly became available. Because being the head of UA is not an easy job. The sector is currently facing some of the toughest challenges in decades, and these include a lot of government reviews over governance, anti-Semitism, sexual assault, and so on. At the same time, the majority of universities are in deficit, while the tap of their main source of external revenue, international students, is being turned off. Domestic students also aren't as eager to go to university as they were a decade or so ago as the policy tables turned in favour of a free TAFE. And that's only touching the surface. As wiser heads than mine might say, it's complicated, stupid. Luke has been employed in the higher education sector his entire career. He was Chief Executive of the Australian Technology Network for 5 years before UA, and before that he was a political advisor to Tanya Plibersek, and before that, when she was Shadow Education spokeswoman, and also Chris Evans when he was actually Minister for Education under the Rudd government, correct? Luke is a self-confessed policy nerd who enjoys making changes, advocating for good policy and making it happen in the national system. He is also partial to a glass of champagne, I hear. We look forward to what he has to tell us now about the future of higher education. Please, stop. For those watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter or X, where our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for that warm welcome. A bit depressing, but warm nonetheless. Can I thank the National Press Club for this opportunity? I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose lands we meet today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge some people in this room: parliamentarians, chancellors, vice-chancellors, senior public servants, industry leaders, and special guests, friends and family. It's an absolute privilege to be here in my capacity as CEO of Universities Australia. I've been in the job for a little over a year now and not much has happened. In many ways, I still feel new to this job, but in no way am I new to this wonderful sector. I've had the pleasure of working in and around universities for more than 2 decades. In this time, I've seen the first-hand power of education, the way it transforms lives, how it lifts people out of adversity and into opportunity, opening the door to a bigger, brighter future. In addition to seeing it, I've experienced it. I'll never forget my time studying. I first graduated with a Bachelor of Music from the University of Melbourne in 2002. That experience truly changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. I learnt about people and the world, but I was challenged and I was exposed to new and different perspectives. But it didn't stop there. I found myself later at RMIT, then Monash, and I quit when I finished at ANU. My own mum, who is in the room with us today, was not afforded the same opportunity as me. Growing up in the 1950s and 60s, the daughter of a postman, she was told university wasn't for her. She wouldn't have been the only one. Instead, Mum was sent to St Vincent's and told to start trainee nursing. But she had an aspiration for me, and she made sure her experience wasn't mine. and that's how I became the first member of my immediate family to get a degree. My mum did eventually attend university, but not until much later in life. She did postgraduate nursing and finished her career helping others become nurses. Today, it is my aspiration for all Australians to have the same opportunity that I did to attend university. But this is more than a personal aspiration of mine, or at least it must be. The need to open the door to university for more Australians has never been greater. New targets show we need to educate 1 million more domestic students each year by 2050. That's 1.8 million students a year, more than double the number currently studying at university. That's what our economy demands, and it's what our future prosperity depends on. As such, we must view this task as a critical national imperative, not simply an educational priority. There's too much at stake not to. Right now, we're in a great period of economic, technological and societal change. The push towards a net zero economy is happening at pace. New technologies like artificial intelligence are reshaping us, and geopolitical shifts are changing our way of life. This all creates both opportunities and challenges. Opportunities we must embrace and challenges we must overcome to succeed as a nation. So what do Australia's universities have to do with this task? The short answer is everything. Australia's universities educate the skilled people our economy needs in greater supply. People to guide the transition to clean energy. People to navigate rapid technological change. People to calm conflict. People to care for sick and ageing Australians. People to teach and shape future generations. People to design new infrastructure for a growing population. People to provide essential services to all Australians, like paying pensions and protecting us online. And people to help drive productivity and economic growth. Our future depends on these people, perhaps more so than our politicians sometimes acknowledge. This is concerning, particularly with everything in front of us to navigate. That's not to say the skills challenge Australia faces is lost on our public officials. I don't think that for a moment. Fee-free TAFE and programs to increase apprenticeships are worthy initiatives. Vocational education and the jobs that flow from it are vital to our economy and our future. But our universities must receive equal attention and equal support. I don't think that is necessarily the case right now. In the years ahead, more jobs will require more skills taught at our universities. The government's projections show that around half of all new jobs created in the coming years will require a university degree. This means we need to recognise that universities are an essential ingredient in our nation's future. It means putting universities at the centre of Australia's response to the skills challenge. There has been some reluctance to do this. This is clear in the government and opposition's quasi-anti-university rhetoric. It's also obvious in the underfunding of our teaching and research by successive governments, and I'll return to this topic later. You've heard me say that universities are treated more as a political plaything than a policy priority. They have been for some time. Our chair, Professor David Lloyd, stood on this stage not so long ago making the very same point. We both called this out last year as we witnessed the politicisation of our international education sector. At the time, I said no other sector is treated this way, especially not one that delivers so much for the nation. Not mining, not agriculture, not tourism, none of them. International education is our nation's biggest export outside of mining. It's an additive industry, not an extractive one. It pays for essential services. It supports 250,000 jobs. It funds vital university research, and critically, it subsidises the education of Australian students. This means Australian taxpayers pay less. That's why it's crazy to even think about curtailing it. Let's also not forget what international students add to our workforce and our communities. They work in the hospitality, retail, tourism and health sectors while they study. And they strengthen Australia's cultural fabric and links to the outside world. The Reserve Bank has warned that federal policies to limit international students puts all of this at risk. International education should be above politics. Instead, we're told it's worth not much more than a few votes at the ballot box. And that's a very bitter pill to swallow. I spent a lot of last year travelling the country visiting our 39 members. I saw firsthand the financial pain so many of them are in. But it wasn't just the sledgehammer effect of Ministerial Direction 107 hitting their bottom lines. The long tail of COVID-19 and years of underfunding was so obvious, particularly in regional communities. The result? Job losses, classrooms in desperate need of repair, and course cancellations. All this at a time when universities need to be growing to skill more Australians, not potentially contracting. Our sector needs to be supported in this endeavour, not hindered. Remember, we're being asked to educate 1 million more students each year by 2050. This is not simply for the benefit of universities. It is, as I've said, a critical national imperative to ensure our economy grows and Australia prospers. Our own government tells us this target could add as much as $240 billion to the economy by 2050. That's the equivalent to more than a $20,000 boost for Australian households. I'll say it again. Australian households would be more than $20,000 better off if we achieve this task. That's something every Australian can understand, a dividend worthy of bipartisan political support. But if we are to realise this return, we must focus on good policy, not politics. In a federal election year, it's high time the major parties come to the table. Regrettably, the summer reset our sector had hoped for has not materialised. Labor's legislation to limit international student commencements remains parked in the Senate. The Coalition, meanwhile, is still threatening deeper cuts to foreign student numbers. Vice-Chancellor salaries and university governance are now in the political crosshairs, and social cohesion issues continue to play out on campuses and in the wider community. I'm not for a second suggesting that universities are above scrutiny. Our sector is not perfect, far from it. These are really important issues to work through, and we will continue to work through them. Our responsibility to provide safe and respectful campuses is not something we shy away from. It's our duty as educators and employers. You cannot have a healthy democracy without a healthy university sector. At the same time, we can't lose sight or put off the major policy discussions we need to have. What exactly do we want our universities to do for the nation? How are we going to build our sector for the future to deliver that outcome? How do we fund student places to achieve that required uplift in participation to fuel our economy? How do we break down barriers to university for underrepresented groups? How do we fund university research to drive innovation and Australia's progress? And how do we invest in the infrastructure needed to support expanded teaching and research activities? Again, this is not an exercise in self-interest. Universities matter to all of us. Every Australian in every corner of our country benefits from what universities do, And right now, Australia needs more of what we do. We need more skilled professionals educated at university. The Tech Council of Australia says Australia needs 1.2 million people in tech jobs by 2030. Engineers Australia expects a shortfall of up to 100,000 engineers in coming years. This year, according to the government, we're already 4,000 teachers short of where we need to be. The government also estimates an incredible shortage of 123,000 nurses by 2030. Equally important to our future is research, innovation and development. Like educating skilled workers, Australia needs to lift its game to do more R&D. The current picture is not so rosy. A 13-year decline in investment in R&D has created a national emergency. That's the view of Robin Denholm, who's leading the government's review of the R&D system. She says an extra $25 billion a year is needed to simply bring Australia in line with its global peers. It's an eye-watering price tag, but it is in our national interest to be inventing new products and generating original ideas. Our communities, productivity and future economic growth depend on them along with a skilled workforce. So too do the agendas that Labor and the Coalition are taking to the next federal election. The major party platforms might have different views on how to get there, but the end goals remain relatively the same. Both want to build a stronger economy, deliver affordable and reliable energy, support strong and sustainable communities, deliver cheaper medicine and quality healthcare, and most importantly, they don't want any Australian left behind. The reality is none of these goals can be met without skilled workers and research. That's why the conversation must turn from politics to policy. Our public institutions, like public schools, are worthy of full and proper support. We can't help the Albanese government build Australia's future without it. Nor can we partner with the Dutton government to get Australia back on track without its support. But if we are to deliver for the next government and future ones, we need to be match fit. We've got some work to get there. Right now, our sector is not the picture of financial health. In 2022, 26 universities were in deficit, up from only 3 in 2014. Back then, in 2014, Australia's universities collectively posted a 6.8% operating surplus. By 2022, that had deteriorated to a collective deficit of 3.6%. In this period, average Commonwealth funding for student places fell 8%. The drop can largely be attributed to the much maligned Job Ready Graduates package introduced by the Coalition at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. This change in policy altered fees for students and reduced funding for universities. Today, we have around $1 billion less for student places every year under this funding system. That's the equivalent of around 33 student places. Let that sink in. We are potentially educating 33,000 fewer students each year. I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but it is a worst case scenario. It's epically self-defeating. The rationale for change becomes even greater when you consider enrolment outcomes. Job Ready graduates sought to boost enrolments in areas of national priority. It's now cheaper to study teaching or health-related disciplines, 2 areas of workforce shortage, yet the scheme has failed to turbocharge enrolments. In 2023, after Job Ready graduates, there were fewer students studying teaching and nursing than in 2020. Australia, of course, has a chronic shortage of both. The Job Ready graduates has done nothing to help this. We need more teachers and we need more nurses. Our suboptimal funding system is not helping to produce these workers to the extent we need. I should take this opportunity to stress that the cost of degrees is set by the Commonwealth, not universities. And I want to call on the next federal government to work with us as a priority to correct this madness and set new rates. Rates that are fair and affordable for Australian students, regardless of their degree. Pocketing cheap wins here only comes at the expense of future generations and our national productivity. The former government promised a review of job-ready graduates that never happened. The Albanese government then deferred the problem, making it a matter for the Accord. Well, the Accord's now done and the jury's in. Job-ready graduates has failed. Yet, we're still waiting for change. I welcome the Coalition's commitment today to honouring its promise to review job-ready graduates. But this is too important to kick down the road. I've heard the argument that the price of acting is too great. Surely the cost of not acting is even greater. Remember how much Australian households stand to benefit from a fully skilled workforce by 2050. They'll be more than $20,000 better off, and our economy will be $240 billion larger. Job-ready graduates has not gotten anywhere near achieving its stated intent. The data shows this. It needs to go, and it needs to go now. I want to thank members of the crossbench who I know are advocating for the student funding system to be reformed and to be reformed quickly. Your support is so very welcomed. Not to focus entirely on what we don't need, let's consider what we do need. Educating 1 million extra students each year by 2050 is no small undertaking. If we are to fulfil this aspiration for the nation, we need to consider how and where they will be taught. Online teaching and technology will have a role to play, but it's naive to think that universities won't require more classrooms and laboratories. In fact, we will require significantly more of both as our sector expands. Universities have never built such facilities without support, nor have they been expected to. The Education Investment Fund, which was ostensibly introduced by former Liberal Treasurer Peter Costello, existed for this very purpose, to help build campus infrastructure. That is, until 2019, when the Coalition and Labor teamed up to close it down. This bipartisan raid on the Education Investment Fund stripped universities and TAFE of nearly $4 billion in dedicated infrastructure funding. Nothing has replaced it. I've already said investment in infrastructure on campuses is down. Our analysis shows real capital expenditure dropped around 40% between 2019 and 2022 alone. This reflects the parlous financial position our sector is in, a position driven by years of underfunding, COVID-19, and international student policy chaos. How are universities supposed to meet Australia's future skills needs without additional facilities? The Education Investment Fund helped build laboratories to fight obesity and diabetes, facilities to drive the development of clean energy technology, classrooms to develop innovative engineering solutions to global problems, and spaces to foster greater collaboration between universities and industry. The list goes on. Some teaching and research facilities on campuses today are no longer fit for purpose. They are relics of the Menzies and Whitlam eras. Our universities are home to some of Australia's brightest minds, people working to protect us from bushfires and to secure our food supply, sometimes in nothing more than a demountable. I don't think any Australian expects that. And so today I'm calling on both Labor and the Coalition to commit to re-establishing the Education Investment Fund, to support the expansion of universities for the nation's benefit, to help deliver high-quality teaching and research to all students, and to create construction jobs and drive economic growth. The case for investment stacks up, and it's a ready-made photo opportunity on the upcoming campaign trail. A bipartisan commitment to funding teaching and research infrastructure is not a nice to have, it's an imperative. We must apply the same focus and commitment to funding research in this country. Government investment in university research has never been lower than it is now. The bigger picture is just as dire. Australia's overall investment in R&D sits at just 1.66% of GDP. That means we're almost 40% behind the OECD average of 2.73%. R&D is the engine room of Australia's future. It drives productivity, economic growth and progress. Universities Australia have called for it to be at the centre of our country's productivity agenda. We will fall further behind in the global race to develop new ideas and products for as long as it's not. Why is it so important we undertake our own research? Because it helps us seize new opportunities when they emerge. It allows us to pivot as circumstances change, and it positions us to tackle global challenges. Our current circumstances put all of that at risk. Australia's funding slide and general indifference to R&D is fuelling a national emergency. Governments typically rise to these occasions. The next federal government's moment awaits. What's needed is a sustained focus at the political level for Australia's R&D system to thrive. Australia recently ranked equal 5th highest in the world for trust in scientists. If Australians trust them, why can't our government? It's a question our own Industry and Science Minister pondered on this very stage a fortnight ago. Minister Husic said Australians deserve a government that believes in science as much as they do. Well, there are things we can do right now without waiting for Robin Denholm and the expert panel to complete their review into Australia's R&D system. The next federal government can raise its investment in R&D irrespective of what business does. It can also lift the PhD stipend base rate from $33,000 to at least $36,000, so our best and brightest aren't living around the poverty line. That's not an unreasonable ask when you consider that the average PhD candidate is 37 years old. Many of these people have families and mortgages to consider while they work to advance our nation's prosperity. I know there is broad support from the crossbench for this increase, and it's welcome. These are quick wins that address the issues that we're all aware of. By delaying action, we're delaying our country's progress and growth. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. Our sector has until now used international student revenue to cover Commonwealth funding gaps. But this can no longer be assured. Something must give, or funding gaps in teaching and research risk becoming chasms. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the government's work so far in implementing some of the recommendations of the Universities Accord. We are very supportive of the practical steps they've taken to support students. Changes to help, paid placements and fee-free uni-ready courses will make a real difference. I want to thank Minister Clare for his commitment to this transformational piece of work. And I want to call on the Coalition to provide greater certainty for our sector by backing the Accord. Progress under Labor has been good, but we have a long way to go. A lot of the heavy lifting still needs to be done. My question today to the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition is simple. Where do universities sit on your list of national priorities? If getting our universities match fit isn't a first-order national priority, how are we going to deliver on all other national priorities? Promises on the campaign trail only get us so far. It's delivery that counts. And as I've said, universities are central to delivering the agendas of both major parties. We've so far seen billions of dollars promised for better roads and more homes. We can't deliver better roads and more homes without engineers. The Coalition has pledged to put nuclear at the centre of its energy plan for Australia. We can't transition to a clean energy future without scientists and other specialists. Both major parties have committed billions of dollars to further strengthen Medicare. We can't deliver healthcare and keep Australians healthy without trained health professionals. Labor's Future Made in Australia agenda simply isn't possible without research and innovation. And the Coalition's guarantee of more defence spending means nothing without technical experts to deliver capabilities. These are all nation-building endeavours. I started my address by asking, what do our universities have to do with building Australia's future? The answer is everything. Whether you agree with that or not, I don't think anyone would say that our universities are in any way supported to deliver what's asked of them, or what our nation needs of them. Australia's universities are needed to educate the smart, skilled people required to make good on almost every promise our major parties make. The next federal government and future ones can't build a better, stronger future for all Australians without them. That means they can't do it without us, universities, an essential ingredient in Australia's future. Our chair, Professor David Lloyd, stood here last year and called for good policy, not politics. Our future, both as a sector and a nation, depends on it. I spoke earlier about aspiration. Let me return to that theme as I finish. Today, 80% of young girls say they aspire to a career that requires a university degree. 1 in 4 want a job as a doctor, nurse, or other health professional. We've come a long way since the 1960s, Mum. But my aspiration is that these young women have the opportunity my mum didn't when she was their age. They have a big role to play in shaping our country's future. But right now, their futures are in the hands of policy and decision makers. Please don't let them down. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Luke. I have so many questions. But I'll start with a hard one. I have a sense of déjà vu that I've heard this speech on this stage many times before, that universities get up and they say how important they are to the economy because they produce the skills of the future and the research of the future, but they're misunderstood by governments and governments just don't like them anymore. And then the final thing is, give us more money. So what's not working for universities if this message has been sent many times in the past?
Thanks, Julie. Would be strange for a CEO of Universities Australia not to come on stage and ask for more support for this sector that is so wonderful. But I think the important thing to remember is we're being told we need to grow. I mean, so my message is that we need to be match fit. And we've had successive governments rely on our capacity to get revenues from other sources for a long time. So the structural underfunding of our sector is now getting to the point it's almost critical. And I know other people have made this case for years, but usually we're allowed to get other revenue from other sources, and we'll champion on to do so by both sides of politics. Last year taught me a lot, particularly with the debate around international students. The fundamental architectures of our funding system are really in need of renovation. So that's my message today. And, you know, I'd love to be sitting here saying we've got lots of money and we can do lots of things for the nation. We want to do those things for the nation. We're public institutions. We're non-for-profit. We're here for the nation's benefit. And that's my message to the policymakers.
Thank you. Our first question is from John Ross.
So thanks for the speech, Luke, but I'm actually going to ask you about something else. One of the speakers at your conference yesterday was Kathleen Folbig, who spent 20 years in jail for supposedly smothering her 4 little children. And she was finally released and acquitted after an inquiry which was prompted by an open letter which was signed by about 90 prominent Australians, including some very senior academics. And it said that there was new genetic evidence which raised serious questions over her conviction and suggested a terrible injustice had been done to her. My question is, do academics and even universities themselves have a responsibility to speak out publicly when they become aware of terrible harm being done? Or does the principle of institutional autonomy, the idea that universities don't take sides on things, does that sort of preclude that sort of action?
Well, I'm not sure if you met, I'm sure you did, met Kathleen's wonderful young lawyer who's educated at the University of Newcastle. What an intelligent and eloquent young woman who fought very, very hard to get the freedom for Kathleen that she deserved. I think there's a couple of things in that, John. One is science matters and science is important and we need to trust scientists, and apparently we do. In Australia, we need policymakers and the structural systems around the legal system and others to trust scientists as much as Australians do. And it's important that we foster that on our universities with, good, strong funding for research and teaching so we can support the next generation of scientists. I thought it was really, really telling that Kathleen chose a university summit for one of her first public appearances, because she values how much science and knowledge helped get her freedom. I, for my sins, studied law, and I know there were many, many innocence projects around Australia and internationally, bright young people working on freeing people who are incarcerated for the wrong reasons at our universities right now, so I'm really proud of that.
So should universities speak up on those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, if this is a question of academic freedom, within the rules of academic freedom, certainly, right? But of course, people have passions and they manifest on university campuses through the research and the work they do through things like innocence projects, and that's a good thing.
So just on that, what is the line in the sand between academic freedom and freedom of speech?
Well, we had a speech this morning from the Shadow Minister, Sarah Henderson, who quoted Marsha Langton on this very issue, and I think you should refer to her comments on it. I thought they were very beautiful. That academics have an obligation to exercise academic freedom within their areas of expertise and research.
Okay. Our next question is from Andrew Brown, AAP.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your speech this afternoon, Luke. No one would dispute that running a university is a hard job. Many Australian Vice-Chancellors earn salaries of well over $1 million. So for comparison, that's double the pay of the Prime Minister and more than counterparts in leading universities such as Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford and Stanford. How can the sector justify such exorbitant salaries that are well above some of the leading institutions in the world that consistently outrank Australian universities in terms of their output? Is it a case, as stated by UC Vice-Chancellor Bill Shorten, that defending Vice-Chancellor pay is a lost cause?
Thanks for that question. I'm absolutely delighted that I don't set Vice-Chancellor salaries, I think mine looks very small in comparison, but no, nonetheless. That is a matter for our university governing councils and chancellors who set university Vice-Chancellor salaries, but I will say this. Australian universities are incredibly large compared to other global systems, right? And if you think about some of the medium-sized universities that I used to represent in my old job, they have more employees in places like in some of those universities than government departments, and they have private income that they get from international students that is not Commonwealth funding directly. So this is a matter for appointed councils under the governance structures. It is being examined in both the Senate right now and as well as the Expert Council on Governance Matters. So I think it's appropriate for that work to go ahead. And I would say any further questions about VC salaries should really be a matter for the chancellors and the governing bodies.
Would those governing bodies be out of touch, you would say, for many Australians?
Well, I'll say this. universities in Australia are very, very well governed, and we did a very good job despite the deliberate policy neglect during COVID. So a lot of that is to do with good governance and management.
Next question, Joanna Panagopoulos from The Australian.
Hi, Luke. Firstly, given the bipartisan push to cut immigration, what is the overall number of international students that the university sector needs to stay viable? And secondly, you spoke a lot about the funding slide and Commonwealth funding gaps in your speech. How much additional funding, public funding, do universities need overall?
Well, I'll come at your question from the second part first, because if we fundamentally get the right amount of funding to deliver our core mission of education and research for Australians, then we can have a discussion about how much we can top up with international students. But the threshold question to both sides of politics in an election year is, will you fund education and research fully and properly so we can get on our core mission to deliver for Australians? Then we can have a discussion around the size of the international education sector.
But do you have a number? How much do we need?
I certainly don't. There are 39 individual institutions that make up Universities Australia, and they all have different, operating models and visions and connections with the world. It would be churlish of me to come up with a number on the fly here.
We must have crunched some numbers on the international students. There's no sort of figure that you can...
Well, I'll tell you this much. Don't take a sledgehammer to international students while we've got structural underfunding in our teaching and learning and research activities like we saw last year, which saw at least 70,000 fewer student visas in the system, which caused $4.3 billion of economic harm to the country, would cost the country $19 million a day, and brought some of our regional universities and universities in our outer growth suburban areas to their knees.
Our next question is from Tim Winkler from Future Campus.
Thanks, Luke. The Job Ready Graduate Scheme is failed not just because it was inequitable, but because it failed to understand how to shift student demand and what were the drivers of student demand. How do we avoid the same issues with the Accord when we're talking about getting 1 million more students into the system who are not really related to the sector at the moment, who are not engaged with the sector? How do we understand what they want?
It's a great question. I've been around this sector for such a long time, and I've seen the kind of boom and bust approach to price signalling for students. I think it's really important we come back to some basics here, that university, because it's so important to the future of Australia, remains a viable option to Australians irrespective of their background. And that means the more that students have to pay, even though it's deferred through HECS, the more it becomes a consideration. And that takes poorer kids out of the equation quicker than it does richer kids. And that's a tragedy. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we've got Jobs and Skills Australia now. We fought very hard as universities to make sure that we're included in Jobs and Skills Australia. So the setting of skills priorities for the nation is really important, and it should be done. And Barney and his team should do that work. And then finally, we need to work with business on incentives. Building aspiration to do a university degree is about the job that you'll get. So we need industry to come and make those really clear signals that the jobs are available at the end of the rainbow.
But at a time when there's a lot of discussion about the social licence of universities and a dislocation of universities and their mission and what's happening around the kitchen table, how do we presume to know what those million students want?
Well, what I can tell you is the Australian public, when they go down the street and they go do their daily shopping and they get, some drugs from the drugstore or from the chemist, or they drop off their kids at school, or they see a road being built or a bridge being built, all of those interactions have to do with skilled professionals, skilled workers that come both out of our fantastic TAFEs who have apprenticeships and come through our universities. So it's a community effort, it's a Team Australia effort to build aspiration for not only the skills you need, but the job you can get. And I think it's an important thing. It's not just on universities, it's on families, it's on school system, it's on the industry and business, it's on government. We need to build excitement and aspiration for what the end goal is, which is a rewarding and successful career through skills you get at university.
So just on that, in your speech, you made a very passionate argument against job-ready graduates and why we need to get rid of it. But, I would make the point that, universities and their vice-chancellors were around when that policy were made, and they probably did not advocate strongly enough at the time against that policy and took the rationale that perhaps it was politically savvy not to. I mean, you know, where do we kind of stand in the, you know, the advocacy and the political gain when students are really the ones who are suffering as a result of that decision?
Well, that was 2017, and I had a lot more hair then. It was a nice time. But a couple of things. One is, well, ATN and I actually stood in the Senate and said we should amend it before we pass it. That's the first thing. But the really important thing to remember is there was a sledgehammer approach taken to us then by Simon Birmingham, who said, I'm just going to freeze the numbers, that's all you get, no more indexation, bada bing, bada boom. This provided some level of hope for certainty and stability in our sector at the time, and we asked the government and the parliament to amend it before they passed it, which they didn't. We also were engaged in a process where we would look at funding the structural underfunding of research at the same time, and that never materialised either. So we got a dud deal, and we're accepting that now. But we certainly were given some bigger promises that weren't delivered. So
you don't accept any responsibility for that? I mean, I'll just take you back another few years, and that was when the coalition government tried to deregulate university fees, and vice-chancellors unanimously supported that. And we now we know that that policy would have been devastating to young people in Australia. So, you know, how do we kind of balance that out?
That was even more hair time ago. That was 2014, Julie. And there was one Vice-Chancellor who quite famously didn't like it, who will remain nameless. But look, you know, it's a boom and bust. At the time, we were told by a coalition government that you can put as much as you like on HECS because you can deregulate your fees. And we were told by the same government 3 or 4 years later that we had to curtail the size of the help debt and repay it quicker. So, you know, it's about rational, good policy to get us match fit for now in 2025 and beyond. You know, you and I could wonk on this all day.
Oh, over several champagnes.
Yes, that's right. But, you know, we want good policy. We've spent years on the Accord now. Let's kind of commit to the architecture that we need to get this system right.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Erin Moley from News Corp.
Hi, Luke. This morning, the Coalition Education spokeswoman said her government would reinstate the 50% pass rule. What impact would that have on the sector that's trying to boost equity student enrolments and graduation rates?
It'll be devastating. And I think our universities were very displeased and upset with the 50% pass rule when it came in, because it undermines the autonomy of our world-class teachers and educators at our universities to support students in their own universities. It's such a blunt rule. And we will be asking again for Sarah and the Coalition to reconsider that. There are wonderful, passionate people that teach in our universities, and I've never seen them more annoyed by a rule like the 50% pass rule. You know, we take students from a wide range of backgrounds in our universities. We're getting close to half of non-school leavers coming into universities. People come with different backgrounds and perspectives, and we need to be able to support them at university, not through arbitrary rules set by the Commonwealth. It's the same thing with the fee setting. We need to put these things in context, but a lot of these rules are put in place by the Commonwealth to us, not with us.
The Senator's trying to increase the quality of graduates. What other strategy, first of all, do you think that is something that should be focused on? And if it is, what are the strategies that need to be in place then?
Is this for equity students, do you mean?
Yes, and all students.
Look, I think universities are self-accrediting and autonomous institutions who know their core business of education, do a fantastic job of supporting their cohorts. And their students and their cohort of students. And I always worry about mandated policies from one central point in Canberra, or without proper consultation. I always saw some of these policies, like the 50% rule, as a savings measure, because it does have a savings outcome in the budget papers when it was introduced. So is it a real policy to drive change in the sector, or was it a savings measure? And that's a question that we should probably give to the Coalition, I think. And the government, who took a while to change their mind, for that matter.
Thanks.
But isn't the problem with the 50% rule that it's about young people acquiring debt for no qualifications? People who are possibly ill-placed to be at university, who are struggling to finish, and that it's trying to save them from extra debt?
Well, my love of champagne was found in the first year of university, Julie, and if I had a 50% pass rule, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. So let's be real. Young people get to university and, you know, they might come from some all-boys school in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne and go, what WTF is this, right? So I think it's, you know, I think we have to remember that people are becoming citizens, right? And the university should be entitled to support them in the first instance.
Okay. The next question is from Caitlin Cassidy, who's the education reporter at The Guardian, and I'm going to ask the question for her. So she says, you mentioned safe and respectful campuses in your speech. In 2023, Universities Australia's then chief or CEO committed to holding another national survey of sexual assault and harassment on campuses following a backlash over its response to gender-based harm. That's a very long sentence. 2 years later, when will the survey be released and what has changed on campuses to address those concerns?
And thanks, Caitlin. I did make the joke that Caitlin didn't exist and was only a bot, so that's kind of very funny that she's come in virtually today. But I know who you are, Caitlin. But importantly, we are absolutely committed to deliver the next iteration of the National Student Safety Survey, and it was a top priority of mine coming into this job in February. I and the team calculated I've spent more than 100 hours talking to student groups, advocates, victim survivors, practitioners, and people that can help us inform how the next survey should look and what it looks like. And we're very close to delivering that, and we will in 2025.
Do you know when in 2025?
We will do it at a time that suits students, because if we have to work out where's the best time to get the best amount of students engaged in the process, and that looks more like the second half of this year.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, Melissa Code from the Mandarin.
Hello, Melissa Code from the Mandarin. One of the sort of overarching themes that you identified as affecting the sector was politics looming larger than rational policy. This is a common complaint that many sectors have, and perhaps an enduring one. I'd like to draw on some of the themes that your summit addressed, this idea of social cohesion and anti-elitism. You talk about the long tail of COVID-19. That hasn't just affected sectors, it's affected public sentiment. Do you think the anti-woke sentiment poses a risk to how the sector advocates for itself and politicians reckon with the challenges?
Look, it's a good question, and obviously there's a major disruption that's happened in America with Trump 2.0, and it was fantastic to have that as a main session at yesterday's summit. What I think is really important to remember is the utility of universities delivering its core mission and what that means to everyday Australians. In the last year, we've been running a campaign, which you'd expect the national peak body to do, to build better support in the wider community for Australians. And one of the things we learnt about that was positive sentiment, once articulated in a certain way, skyrockets for universities. Because if you put a simple proposition that we have 4,000 fewer teachers than we need today, and universities are the only way to get those skilled workers into the Australian community and to the workforce to support young people. 132,000 more nurses, the same proposition, skilled professionals, skilled workers, essential workers for our economy. And I think then you kind of remove yourself from what happens on the front pages of newspapers and occupies, political pundits. Let's think about what the real Australian people need and want from the university sector. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. But I also reflect on the fact that, as I said in my speech, a healthy democracy ought to have a healthy university sector. And part of that is having debate and knowledge and understanding shades of grey and being on campus. But campuses should foster that debate, but they should be places that are peaceful and safe for students and staff alike. And we've worked very hard as a sector to address these emerging issues over the last 12 months.
And just to follow that idea through, I love the notion of an optimistic narrative that can sort of sit alongside that which politicians sell. But you spoke of gaps becoming chasms and crises. So how do we balance the urgency of what you want addressed and then the optimistic, aspirational thing that we're moving towards?
Well, you know, my hope is that, you know, the more we talk about the important role of universities and our core mission in education and research, the more Australians, irrespective of whether or not they went to university or not, they see the value for us as part of our future. And that's the whole part of my speech today. And they recognise that when you take a sledgehammer to international students, the impact that that will have is detrimental to something that's really important to them.
Thanks.
Just on that, Bill Shorten, who's here today, spoke at a pre-conference conference, and he said during that speech that a lot of Australians don't really understand what Australian universities do, why they're there, why they exist, and for a whole lot of those people, they don't see that those universities are accessible to them. And that kind of contradicts what you just said then, especially around international students. So how do you kind of balance that up?
Well, it's true. I mean, we've got more work to do. We always have more work to do. And in an era where there is declining trust in institutions, I think it's really important that universities invest in themselves in terms of how they engage with their communities. But then I think about wonderful examples. I think Adam Shoemaker's got a tax clinic at VU in Melbourne that helps people who've got, for some reason, fallen out of the tax system and need help. You know, there are things that we do that are practical to help, like the Innocence projects that we have right across the world, to help people like Kathleen Folbig. So I am going to be the chief evangelist for great things that our universities do for the rest of the time that I'm in this job. And if it breaks down the perceptions in the community, that's a good thing.
Excellent. Next question, Natasha Beater from The Australian.
Oh, hello. Look, I do not understand how the sector still cannot tell us how much funding it needs to operate at, you know, the required level for research and teaching, because every other sector will be able to quantify the mining industry, roads, you know, public schools. You do a comparison with public schools. They said we need a 5% increase in funding. They lobbied, they're getting it, but it's tied to demonstrable targets and outcomes. So would universities be prepared to surely get some accounting or data analysts or, you know, economists out of the universities, work out how much you need overall to function, and then tie it to some performance measures, for example, completion rates, first-year completion rates, student satisfaction, outcomes of research, commercialisation, all those sorts of things, as would happen in the private enterprise?
Let's start with the school system, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot. So the school system had a fundamental review headed by David Gonski that's created this idea of a schooling resource standard. This is how much we need to educate a primary school student, this is how much we need to educate a secondary school student, and these are the other things we need, both the institutional loadings and the student profile loadings. There's some work being done towards that, obviously, in response to the Universities Accord, and I thank Mary O'Kane for advocating for a needs-based funding for the Australian higher education system, but more work needs to be done on it. That's the first thing. So we don't have an SRS that I can say we need 5% more. There has been costing exercises undertaken by Deloitte and others in the past, and they're completely not fit for purpose. So if we want to do a costing, an activity-based costing system approach for our university sector, we should do it immediately, and we should do it while we're fixing JRG. That's the first thing. Second thing is, how long is a piece of string? How much research does the country want us to do? How much research does business want to do with universities? I can't quantify that until we've got answers from other people that can answer those questions.
But for the general public, they want to see results. So you might say, we have a shortage of 120,000 nurses. We need X amount of money to educate those nurses. Or, you know, we could cure cancer with $1 billion, and these different researchers all working together. It appears that everyone's rowing their own boat and there's no coherent narrative. You talk about demountable buildings. In Brisbane, Griffith University has just spent, I think, $65 million on what I can only call a trophy building, the Treasury building, so they can have an office in the city. Now, Joe Blow, who is struggling to pay the mortgage, sort of is finding it hard to hear we want more money without any targets, any monetary value put on it.
I'll try and answer it this way. I look forward to Barney Glover's next speech at the Press Club or elsewhere where he advocates equally for university participation as he does for VET and TAFE. That would be a good thing. But the second part to your question is there is real pain in the university sector right now, particularly in regional communities, particularly in regional Queensland. So, you know, it's not all the same across the university sector, I accept that. But why is it not the same? Predominantly because some of our universities are better able to attract international students, both in terms of their proximity, their location, what they offer, also thanks to that horror, which was 107. So I'm glad that's over, as the first thing. Second thing is, that's only a point in time, one building, right? It's what goes on in there and what the outcome is, and that's what we're asking for today. You know, the core mission of teaching and research is structurally underfunded. We used to top it up with international students. Now we're being told we can't have as many as we need in the system. So we need to come back to basics and work out how we pay for those fundamental parts of what we do first.
But do you understand that governments can't set that immigration level unless they know what the funding implications are for you, and know where everyone's operating in the dark as to how much money you need, and therefore then working it out backwards from international student revenue?
Yep, and as I've said about creating demand, Team Australia moment, right? We need whatever an ATEC may or may not be, political class, industry, universities, community, school system, all working together.
Okay, thank you. Nick Stewart from Ability News.
Thanks. You say that universities know their students. You say they're doing a fantastic job. If they know their students, there are a lot of students with disability who've begun doing courses and not completed them. Surely universities would be prepared to accept that part of the bargain is if they take somebody on and they can't actually do the job, that they should not have to pay for the course that they've been done. At the moment, you're asking for more money. How about you give something back and say, right, look, we won't charge people with disability if they don't complete the course, or we won't charge other students if they don't complete the course. Seems fair.
I have been in this sector a long time and watched, particularly over the last couple of years, and especially when we had a funding cliff, so we got funded for a certain amount of students, how many of our universities, because of their commitment to equity and participation, enrol students above what they were funded for. So that's the first thing. Our universities will do the right thing because it's in our nature.
Is that the right thing or the wrong thing, to take in someone who can't necessarily complete the course?
I think that's the right thing. I think, you know, where there's demand for education. But on disability, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'll come back to my point that I made about the Gonski reforms in schools. The last piece of that work was disability and loadings associated with disability. We've also been doing some excellent work with the Department of Education and others on how we incorporate disability loadings into a needs-based funding model for the Australian higher education system. It's complicated work, but it's important work. If we're to include more people, 1 million more by 2050, we need to make sure we include as many people irrespective of their circumstances in life.
Thank you. Our final question, sorry Nick, our final question today is a second one from John Ross from Times Higher.
Hello again. Look, just on job-ready graduates, has Universities Australia sort of done the thinking about what it wants in place of job-ready graduates? Would you like to roll back to the system that was in place, in 2020, or something completely new? Do you have an idea what you want?
Well, we want it to be fairer and send that signal to Australians from all walks of life that university is a good bet. And it's affordable and the right thing for them, and the thing that they should take on. Some universities and university groupings like the Innovative Research Universities have done excellent work on proposing alternatives to job-ready graduates. But I come back to my point, John, university fees are a matter for Commonwealth legislation, and we need to work with the Commonwealth on what they're willing to pay. University students, on average, pay 48% of the cost of their degree, according to job-ready graduates. 52% is a direct grant from the Commonwealth. So that's the question of how much does the government want to pay for teaching and learning? And we're saying it's underfunded, so we need more in that category, and we probably need to work out what is the appropriate amount that the student should pay, commensurate with their private benefit they get later in life.
Thank you. Luke Sheehy, thank you very much. Here's a membership to the National Press Club.
Thank you very much, Shirley.